Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another No Days studio session. It is a Sunday glass gospel session, and we are going to be working with No Days Powder Wafers today. I had this idea that I wanted to share with people how to use these powder wafers, how I'm successful with them, so that you all could start playing with them a little bit more and being successful and coming up with great ideas on different things that you'd like to make. Well, I found some inspiration in the post-it note that I had next to my computer, and I thought, you know, that would be a super cute plate. I want to make an emoji plate. And so you can see I took my inspiration. I am cutting the powder wafers with my Silhouette Cameo, so we'll be talking about that a little bit throughout this whole studio session. I'm going to go start to finish. I've got about halfway through the project finished. The final firing hasn't been complete, so you're going to have to keep your eyes out for that yet. I still have to do one more firing and then a slump firing so that we'll get like the actual finished piece, right? So keep watching for more information on all of this. But yes, the first step is you need to get inspired and figure out what exactly it is that you're going to make. And I figured I'm going to work with the emojis. So for this emoji, looking at this, I need an eye that's open, an eye that's winking, two eyebrows, a little kissy face, and the heart, right? So the first thing that you need to do if you're going to actually load this design into your Cameo, I think you can do some photo editing in the Cameo, like the Silhouette Studio software, but I'm more comfortable with Photoshop. So I usually load whatever it is into Photoshop, size it about appropriately, and even though I've sized it appropriately, once I take it over to Silhouette Studio, it's way bigger than I need it, which is better than way smaller than I need it, and I'll show you that when we get there. Anyway, the, let's see. I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to see any comments that anybody has. So if you have questions, make sure that you hit me with comments. I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to see them, but we'll find out together. And I'll answer any questions as I go if I can. But otherwise, I'm just going to show you exactly what I'm doing for this project. So let's get started. Okay, I've got this. This requires some some editing stuff. So we're going to do that when we're ready to cut this, the powder wafer material. The powder wafer material is, it comes in, I'll kind of review this for you a little bit. So the No Days Powder Wafer material is this sheet of adhesive. It's a dry adhesive. It is not going to be activated until you heat activate it. So you could like sprinkle powder on this and it's not going to stick until you heat it. It comes in a package with the release liner. So this is a silicone release liner. It's got one side is a little bit shinier than the other. That's going to be the side that has the silicone liner on it. This stuff is going to stick to everything but silicone. So silicone release liner is perfect for us. I'm going to show you how we're going to heat activate this after we get it all cut. But that's the first thing. This is one of our materials. The next material that we're going to be using is some glass. I've got a mold, so first off, if I'm going to shape something in a mold, I need to know what mold I'm going to use. It's going to make it life a lot easier on me because the piece of glass that goes in this can't be bigger than it, but it could be smaller than it. So this is my size mold that I need. So this, or the size glass that I need. I have a mold. I know this is what I want. So I took my mold and I placed it upside down on a piece of paper. Took my pencil and traced around the outside of this. You could easily, I mean, just as easily take your ruler and go across like that to figure out what size you need. But I don't know. I do this a lot just because it's easy. It gives you the exact size that you're going to need, right? So after I've got my circle, then I know I need a 5-inch circle. Okay? I'm going to do 2 layers. I like full fuses. I think it's a little bit sturdier for a plate. So I'm going to do a yellow piece of glass for my base, and then I'm going to do a clear piece of glass for my top. I like clear capping pieces because it helps kind of magnify the glass that's underneath it, expands any patterns that there are, but also if you put your powder on the top layer of the clear, then you add a little bit of depth because you're going to get some shadow if the light's hitting it. So it just adds a little bit of interest that I prefer. Okay, so we need to cut some circles. First thing is I'm just going to cut some pieces of glass. I'm just going to cut these pieces of glass to about 6 inches because I want 5 inches as a circle. So I'm going to grab my safety glasses and stick these on. Well, there we go. Okay, The Morton system is really great for cutting these pieces down into exactly what we need. I don't necessarily need to cut this down into a 6-inch piece first. I could actually cut my circle and then zip it across, but this is just going to make it easier to work with in the confined, like the small space that I'm working with. All right, so I've got my Morton system, I've got my ruler, I've got 6 inches over there. It's not really important that it's exactly 6 inches, it just needs to be about here, and cut that off. Bring this out, and there's my score line. Again, I'm gonna let everybody know when you're using these running pliers, you wanna hold back as far as possible. Make sure your screw is up. That line gets lined up with your score line. Just give it a nice gentle squeeze. It's gonna break right where you tell it to. And I can put this extra piece of glass off to the side, and then I'm gonna need a yellow piece as well. Move this over and get my yellow piece in here. So yeah, just cutting this down makes, like, this is the space that I'm trying to work in to show you. If I had the whole table available, I wouldn't necessarily need to cut these down into smaller pieces. After I score my circle, I would cut it into a smaller piece though, so you can do it before or after, either way. And this one is going to be a little bit shy of 5 inches, so I think that's going to be fine for it. So since I like to have one piece on top and one piece underneath, and I want there to be that clear cap, the clear cap is really gonna look nice if it's just the slightest bigger than the base piece of glass, right? So my base piece of glass is gonna be just slightly smaller than 5 inches, and my top piece of glass is going to be about 5 inches, maybe slightly bigger. That way when it fuses and the clear glass goes over the sides of the glass, you're just going to see, you won't end up seeing any of the base piece of glass sticking out. You'll just see that nice clear edge, okay? Get this ready for us. So the next step is cutting our circles. You wouldn't necessarily have to cut a circle. If your mold was a square and you wanted a square, then you would cut a square. I like, you know, the emojis, you generally see those as a face and not a square. You could certainly make a square emoji plate, nothing wrong with that. You could actually make like a little Brady Bunch emoji plate and a square. That'd come back kind of cool. Somebody do that and get back to me and let me know. You have all your emojis looking up and down and over and sideways at each other. All right, but for this one, I wanted to do a circle, so I need to cut a circle. I've got my handy dandy Toyo circle cutter here with me, right? So the Toyo circle cutter, when you're looking at the measurements of this guy, let's see if you can see this. You probably can't really see it, but the measurements on this bar are in centimeters. So instead of 5 inches, I want to know how many centimeters I'm going to be using. And where's my piece of paper? This is where this can come in handy, right? So that's 5 inches across, but if I flip it over, I can see it's about 130 centimeters. So 130 is what I'm going for. So I'm going to take my circle cutter and just give this a slight twist, and you can see here on the bar, maybe, hopefully, here's 10, here's 15, so 10, 11, 12, 13. That would be 130. So I want to bring this over to 130 and then tighten that up. Now, if you're unsure which side you're supposed to be using to measure your circle on, you know, because I don't cut circles all the time, so generally when I pick up the circle cutter again, I've forgotten where everything is supposed to go. If you do that, never fear. Take your piece, get it on a nice flat surface. So I'm just going to take this piece of glass and put it underneath there, okay? Get it on a nice flat surface, and don't push down really hard, but as you're going around, you can kind of see if your cutter head is falling in that nice circle-ish area, right, in the size that you want. Already seeing that I might have some issues here with my bar hitting things, so I'm going to just move anything that might be in the way out. So then you can kind of test and see, okay, that's going to work for me. Move that aside. So I am ready. I'm going to start by cutting, I think I'm going to start by cutting my clear piece. All right, so you saw, I'm going to take my circle cutter, and you can kind of see, here's the wheel. So the wheel on here is going to turn. So as it goes around the circle, it's going to follow your pressure as you push down. A lot of things people tend to be unsuccessful with this when they don't check to make sure that their cutter wheel is aligned in the direction it's going to go. So that would, like for instance, if that's sideways and this is supposed to be going around the middle, that's just going to scratch it and damage your wheel a little bit there, right? So before you push hard, you just want to make sure that you push lightly down to make sure that this wheel pivots to get aligned. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you're using a circle cutter and it happens to you, then it will make sense. So I'm going down flush with the table a little bit more just to check to make sure that I have about 1/4 of an inch at least along all of the edges to the outside of my cutter head. If you're trying to save glass and cutting off only just a little sliver, you're going to end up having a little, you're going to have a lot more burrs and things to fix up. If you can cut and give yourself a little bit of waste, at least 1/4 of an inch, maybe even 1/2 an inch, the circle is going to break much cleaner and you won't have to go in and file the edges off. All right, so here we go. I did this a second ago, so I'm just going to show you again. First things first, you want to make sure that there's nothing in the way, right? When I had my tool over here and I was going around like that, it hit, so that's why I pulled my tool out. And just make sure that nothing is in the way of that bar. All right, make sure this is nice and suctioned. Yesterday I did a little sample piece and I thought I suctioned it and it didn't suction, so it turned over, so it's good because I hadn't pressed yet. I went like that and it moved, so always test that. And then of course I want to test to make sure that my wheel is actually aligned and not dragging sideways. Okay, so it is aligned. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back over this way. I want to try and do one nice even movement all the way around with even pressure. I don't want to start in one spot and then get stuck because I'm trying to fight with my body or whatever. So I got to think like, okay, if I do this, then I can go all the way around without having to stop and reposition anything. So I want a nice even score with no stops. So I'm going to start here, I'm going to push down, and you don't have to push very hard. And then you can see and you can kind of hear, if you're listening, where the where the score line meets itself again. So if you guys can see that score line there, you'll see it as I start to run it. But there's a score line right there. I probably could have done a little bit better job centering this because I have a little bit more glass over here and a little bit less over there. But you'll see what happens, and it'll still be fine. It's fused glass, so even if it breaks wrong, I can still use it in something. All right, so what is she doing? This is the Morton system safety brake system. There's a little button here. This is gonna act like my running pliers, except it allows me to brake from anywhere in the glass, right? So the running pliers, when I'm using these, they're breaking the score by pushing up underneath and then down on either side of my score line. Well, this button is going to let me do the same thing. This is going to be the part that goes up and underneath my score line, so I'm going to put that down on my board. And then this guy right here, this is the safety brake, and if you can see, there's this little divot right there. That would be like the line that's showing you where to push down or where to line your score up. And then as you push down, see how it's going to push down on either side of that score line, right? So it's going to go here on this button. I'm going to put my score on top of that score line, and I don't need to push very hard at all. Typically, a little bit less pressure is better. If you can use just a little bit of pressure and get it to start running, then you can continue the score all the way around. So I didn't press very hard, and you can maybe see right there, see how that score started running? So I'm going to go to another corner. I like to get my corners started first, and I'm just giving it just a little bouncy action, right? Firm pressure. I don't want it to go too hard. Whoop, there we go. So this is what I'm saying. If you press too hard, then sometimes the score is going to run right off the side. That's no big deal. We can clean it up later. But you're going to have less cleanup if you can break a score or, you know, break your circle out without having to go back and clean up that score. And now what I'm doing is just I'm going to the edge of where that score ran and just giving it little pushes to kind of help it meet up with itself in the other spaces. I've got it all scored. Let's see, I think it looks like the score maybe could use a little bit more help over here, but definitely over here it didn't really follow through all the way. So I'm just going to put it over here, give myself a little bit of a push there, a little bit of a push there to kind of encourage that to run. Go, go, go. Oh yeah, and the back over here. Actually, over here I could probably just take my breaker grozers and encourage it to run. Just want my breaker grozers to go right up against it. It's best if you can do this against a table, a square table, because then the table is going to be right here and your breaker grozers are going to go right there. And I didn't really, I didn't really do much of anything at all. I just kind of tweaked it a little bit to help it go down on that side. The secret to working with breaker grozers is you don't want to go directly down like that. Typically you want to go back and down, and as you're using it, typically you're down here, so the table's right here, and you'll go back and down and just kind of back towards your hips, and that's going to make using the breaker grozers, you'll be much more successful that way. Alright, so now that I'm ready to break this out, I want to run some scores. So I'm going to run a score. I don't like to run my scores from the closest spot in and perpendicular to the glass. I have experienced too many times where that score doesn't stop at the break and just runs all the way across. So I prefer coming in from the edge and kind of going almost parallel to my score before in the circle, and I'm starting from the edge of the glass and I'm pushing and breaking it, but I'm not crossing my score, okay? Then once I've got those scores in there, I can bring my running pliers in and just give a nice little squeeze. There we go. Barely squeezing it all, just another nice little squeeze. All right, there's one. And this one will probably break out by itself. I don't know that I had a score over there. There we go. I just have a tiny spot here where I could probably use my breaker grozers to kind of nibble that off. The grozer side of the breakers is the side that's curved. So you can take this and use it kind of like a file. And I'm not doing much of anything at all with the actual breaker grozers. I'm just kind of running the glass along the grozers. I use the bottom of the breaker grozer as a pivot point on this side, and then the top of the glass just kind of runs across the curved side over there, okay? But other than that, this circle looks pretty good. So this circle is ready to use. We'll cut one more circle. I'm going to put my clear glass into the container. So with all the scrap that I cut, I tend to keep Tupperware, like shoebox size Tupperwares, together with all of the scraps, and those scraps go with me when I'm teaching in schools. A lot of times with the residencies that I do through the Nebraska Arts Councils, I work with K through 12 students, and I do some Girl Scout projects as well with their Art Venture program. A lot of times we'll just use scrap for a lot of our projects because we're not building anything big. They're usually making little pendants that they can take home, or they're making the Girl Scouts did some flowers this year, so all the scrap pieces, they can typically find something in the scrap to be able to work with. So I keep those separated by colors in my shoebox containers, and then I can take those with me. The other thing that you can do with those is you can make some pot melts. Pot melts are a great way to use a bunch of scrap, and maybe we'll do something on pot melts eventually down the road, but that one you don't really need any adhesive or anything for. You just need the pot. All right, so we're going to cut another circle out of our clear, or our yellow, rather, right? All right. I'm going to take this and move it just a little bit in. Remember, just a touch, barely any. So I've got my, unscrew it and then just move it to the inside of that 100 and, or that 13, the 130 millimeters, the 13 centimeter mark, right? Yeah, the 130 centimeter. I don't know. 130 millimeter, 13 centimeters. All right, I got it. We good. Okay. Oh, cool. I can see comments, so I know that some people are here. I'm glad to see you. Hi, Peggy. Hi, Mariska. Thanks for the compliments on the hair. I've been having fun. I haven't been getting my hair cut lately, so instead I've been coloring it. My hairdresser is amazing, by the way, so she did such a great job, and I haven't needed a haircut for months, which is awesome, but it does start to get to this point where I feel like it's just kind of layers of nothing that just kind of go everywhere. So the color I've been having a lot of fun with to help kind of give little pops here and there and distract from anything that might be moppy. Wow, you know, it's the littlest cuts that just keep going and going and going. Trying to scan for my band-aids. I know they're down here somewhere. I'll find them here eventually. Okay, so I don't know if you saw what I was doing there, but I was checking to make sure that I had plenty of room all the way around on this before I suction it down. It looks good. I'm gonna suction that down, make sure that it's nice and tight. Oh, see, there, I suctioned it down and it didn't stick. So I wanna make sure before I start pressing anything, oh, that's a little bit close right there, that I've suctioned it down properly. All right, we're gonna try this again. Push and suction. All right, yay, it did it. All right, so here we go. Start this again, and remember, I want to check and make sure that my blade is going, or my glass score is going in the right direction and not gonna go sideways. So here we go. I'm gonna press down. See that? I put my cutter back in its saddle and ran into it. That's all right. I think we'll be good. All right, so I really like making clear circles because they're the easiest to break because you can see your score and you can see your button underneath it. We can still do it with the opaque glass. We just have to kind of guess where the button is. And again, we just want to press lightly. Oh, there you go. So that's what happens occasionally is you'll make that cut and the whole thing comes off all together. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that when I go back, I'm gonna have to kind of probably fix up a little bit, you know how I did with the breaker grozers before on the clear? I'm probably gonna have to do that in those areas right there. All right, so let's see if I can be a little bit more gentle. And sometimes what I'll encourage people to do is just kind of make a couple of pushes in that one area where the score is and then back off, kind of easing the glass into breaking where you want it to. All right, so I can get to the edges here. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of, again, I just do a little bouncy action here. I'm going to come over here and do the same thing, little bouncy action, just kind of trying to coax that score. I might have pushed a little bit too hard on the glass cutter. It's easier to do on the opaque because you can't really see your score as much. And some pieces of glass, you just got to press harder so you don't always catch it. All right, so now you can see this is a good teaching moment. I can show you I've got a bunch of areas where I kind of need to clean up some stuff, right? So that's where the breaker grozers are going to come in handy. Over here, that looks like grozing action, right? So we're just going to take that, turn it sideways so maybe you can kind of see what I'm doing there, right? Nice close-up look. All right, so I love the Morton system for catching all these little splinters and stuff too. Means that when you're cleaning up your workspace, you don't have to work as much. And now I don't want to do breaker, you know, I don't want to do the grozing when I should be doing the breaking. Like this is a really big point, so if I groze that, it's just going to round out that point. So since I can see the score line, I want to come in here and kind of go right up against the edge. And this is where I am kind of going to do, you know how I just told you don't do the straight down? That's kind of the spot where I am doing the straight down. So that's going to allow me to break that off a little bit better. There we go. That is a Toyo circle cutter, and you know I think I have a silver schnitt over here. right? Here's the silver schnit that I have. The silver schnit still measures in centimeters, I think. I'd have to double check that. It has a suction cup over here, but what I've found is that this, the part where it unscrews and then screws back down, I have found that sometimes that strips a little bit, so I have caught this sliding a little bit. They're both good. I like the Toyo a little bit better because the end over here is a little bit more weighted, right? So it's a little bit more weighted over here, which helps me, you know, it helps the glass stay, so I don't have to worry about the glass kind of moving around on me, but they both work well. The other thing I've noticed is, and maybe it's just because this one's older, I should probably tear this apart and put in some sort of grease or cutting oil or something in there. The swivel action on the silver schnit has not been working as well as it should. So I've had some students use this. I might even need to replace that cutting blade. I have had some students use this and make that score with the running wheel, or the scoring wheel running perpendicular to the glass. So basically instead of the nice smooth break, right? So they're both good glass cutters. I can't remember the price difference on them, but I prefer the Toyo. It's a personal preference type of thing. Okay, so now that I've got my 2 pieces of glass cut, this piece, I could probably do a little bit more grossing there, but it looks pretty decent. And you can see the clear glass is just slightly, ever so slightly larger than the base piece of glass. So that's going to give me a little bit of a lip on the outside edge. And then I can bring my mold over here, see how that fits. That looks like it's going to be perfect. So the next thing that we need to do is prep the powder wafers. And before we can prep the powder wafers, we need to cut the powder wafers. So I've got the Silhouette Studio design software open on my computer so we can all see this. So let's see. Here we go. So the Silhouette cutter is going to allow me to cut any design I want into the powder wafers, and here is my emoji. So the first thing I want to do with my emoji is get it loaded into the software. Notice I've made it black and white. That's going to allow me to go over here into my trace window and select my trace area. The trace area simply means I'm getting my cut lines. Okay, so there you can see those are my cut lines. I'm going to go over here to outline. And sometimes you'll have to switch all of, play around with these things until you get it where you need it to be. But you'll be able to tell when you're doing it. Like right now, I've got the whole thing was selected, so it should be pretty good. I'm gonna hit trace outer. No, I'm gonna hit trace. Well, let's see. We'll see what happens. There we go. So those are my trace lines now. Now I can go ahead and take this guy and just move him off the canvas. And since I'm going to cut one, I may as well cut two, because it's, if I'm going to cut, I may as well. I've got 12 inches, a 12-inch wide piece. The powder wafer rolls come in 12 inches by 12 inches or 12 inches by 48 inches or bulk rolls that are much longer. But you've got 12 inches to use. So I cut off a strip like that, and it goes all the way across my cutting mat. So I'm going to go ahead and size it so that I can cut multiples. And I've got the mat that I used before. I cut over here. So I'm going to go ahead and position it over here. So you can see this. I cut out over here already, and now I've got this area. So I've got from about 5 inches, 6, 7, 8, and 9. I'm going to aim for the 5-inch square, and that's where I'm going to cut my next two designs out. Okay, so back to the software. That means as we're designing this, we need to be sure that as we put these designs where they're going to go, this is each of these, the dark lines is 1 inch, so there's a big 1-inch square there. So the little squares that the little teeny tiny squares are 1/4 of an inch, and then a 1/2 inch, and then an inch, right? So I've got 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch. So like this is the spot I'm going to end up putting my patterns over here. And I said I might as well cut 2 of them, right? So I'm going to take this guy, and I'm going to go up here and hit edit. I guess maybe I'm going to select first, right? Nope, 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 not that. Okay. What did I do the other day? All right, let's try this again. Here we go. I selected. Perfect. All right. I selected it. Now I'm going to hit copy, and now I'm going to hit paste, and then I can take this and move it over here. Okay, this little guy up here is your little button that's going to allow you to rotate things. The first thing, right, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches. So up over, whoop, whoop, come on, up, up. Hey, there we go. Up over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, up over here is where I want it to be. And then I can go ahead and move this sideways if I need to. There we go. I'm going to move it down just a touch from the top so that I don't end up off the cutting, not necessarily the mat. It'll be on the mat, but it might not cut my powder wafers, right? So then I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to move this over here, and let's see what happens if we turn him this way. Just kind of trying to see how I can arrange it to conserve some space. Not that I necessarily need to, but you may as well, because otherwise I'm not going to do a positive and negative design with this. So I think that's how is that how I cut it before? Yeah, I gave myself about 5 inches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've got lots of space down here, right? So I could even turn this sideways if I wanted to, and just move it over, whoop, move it over here if I wanted to, right? Okay, so now I'm ready to send this to the printer. But before I send it to the printer, I need to prep the mat and get it on, get the powder wafer material on the mat. I'm going to show you that real quick. All right, so I've got my mat. The mat comes with a protective cover to protect the sticky surface, right? So I've already put my powder wafer material on there, but it's not rocket science. You line it up where you need it to go, and then just make sure that it's actually where you need it to be, and then press down, and voila. But I don't need this guy right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and peel it back off. And you can see where I was earlier. Here's the 5-inch, whoops. The 5-inch mark is right here. This is where, I had a 5-inch by 5-inch square that I kept my design in. So I'm going to end up, I think the 5 inches, it's good. So I'm just going to go ahead and make my next cut here. This part here, you can see there's a little square missing there. That is the test cut. Now this test cut is a really important thing to do when you're working with the Cameo, especially because the more cuts you make with one blade, the more it ends up breaking or wearing out the blade. Okay, so here's my silhouette. I've got it plugged into the computer. I've got my powder wafer material down. This arrow is telling you that that goes in that away. So I'm going to flip this lid open, and I'm going to load my cut mat. So what I want to do is make sure that my cut mat is even up against these lines over here, and then I'm going to push it up against the wheels and hit load cut mat. Next thing I need to do is check my settings. Over here on the software, all right, so just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches. Okay, I'm over my 6. So I've got this all ready. I can go ahead and send it to my software. So I'm gonna send it over to the printer now, and I have some presets already. Is this one of my presets? Okay, so I don't know that I've actually loaded in my preset here, but you can load in presets. And the preset for the powder wafer that I found that works is my ratchet is at 3. Good. The force I want to be at 15, so I'm going to back that off a little bit. Okay, the, what is that? The speed is at 5, so 4 is pretty good, 5 is good. Passes, just 1. I'm only going to have it go over once. So then I can go ahead and save that as my powder wafer. So that's going to be the powder wafer preset. Did I get it spelled right? Okay, we'll name that later. All right, so then I can go ahead and save that. All right, so that is my presets that I'm ready to go. So I'm gonna do a test run, but my test run needs to be over. So I don't know if you can see this. Here we go. I'm moving my blade over. Come on. Ready? Here it comes. There we go. So see the blade moving? All right, that's where I want to do my test cut. I'm going to actually back it off just a little bit. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit test down here. All right, once it's tested, I want to hit unload. Unload my mat, and it looks like my cut went a little bit off the side. Notice my material didn't come quite over there. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my pattern down a little bit before I actually cut this. So let's go back over here into the software, and let's go back over to design and select that guy. I think there's a way to select them both, but I can't really remember right now, so I'm just going to do this really quickly. Okay, there we go. Move that there. Move this guy down a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and send it back to the computer or the printer. I'm going to load my cut mat. Okay. And now I can go ahead and print again. Oh, right, the ratchet. So if you need the ratchet, if you need to change the ratchet, come over here. Make this, okay. And the ratchet has all these numbers here, and you can see there's that little red mark. There's a spot over here where you can stick that in to change the ratchet, so you can change it if it needs to be a different size, right? So I've got it at 3. The razor's down there, so you don't want to touch that spot. You can go ahead and put that in. I want to push down and make sure it's tight, and then tighten that back up, and then I can go ahead and send it to my printer. So I'm going to do that now. Down here, I've done my test. Now I can go ahead and send it. So it takes a little while for this to cut, but nowhere near as if you were using an X-Acto blade and trying to hand cut it. You can certainly use stamps like punchers. You can use like those scrapbooking tools like paper punches. You can use those with the powder wafer material. You can use die cutters. I've got a die cutting machine that I've used before, so you can use that and do numerous cuts that way. The Silhouette just helps you create custom designs that you might want to do instead, so you don't have to rely on designs that other people have already. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close out that Silhouette software. I can go ahead and hit unload now, and there we are. And now go ahead and just move this guy back and out of the way again. Now you can see, I'm hoping you can see all the little tiny score lines that are in there in that cut mat. Next step is to remove all that stuff, and then we can prep the powder wafer material. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this whole thing off so that it makes it really easy to see what's left over. And as I'm doing this, I want to make sure, did I lose an eye? Here we go, here's my eyebrows. As I'm doing this, I want to make sure that I kind of keep these pieces all where they're supposed to be. Like this eyebrow is actually supposed to go over here, and that one's supposed to go over there. So that's where I'm going to go ahead and bring my design in again. So my inspiration, if I can bring this in, and then when I'm heat setting these pieces, I'm going to try and keep them organized too. Because these little eyebrows, there's 2 little eyebrows, and there's 2 bigger eyebrows, and then there's 2 winky eyes, which look like big eyebrows. So there's just all sorts of designs that kind of look the same. So I want to keep organized. This isn't always going to be an issue. You know, if you've got 3 flowers that you're cutting, it might be obvious that one's big, one's small, and one's medium. Okay, so take my test squares off of there as well. So now there's a sticky cover or sticky coating on this, and so I want to make sure that I put my acetate or vinyl or whatever this is back on there to protect my sticky coating, and then I can go ahead and put it back in the plastic container where it lives. I want to make sure that that always stays flat. I don't want it to get warped or start to bend anyway. Turn that off and push this all the way back, and now we can go ahead and start heat setting. Well, heat setting, I'm gonna need, I like to use my griddle. So I've got my griddle, I've got a cake spatula, I have some powder wafer activation plates around here somewhere, and this is a secret that I'm gonna tell you. I picked up from Janine Stillman when I went to her studio, and she, I taught her how to use the powder wafers, and then she started playing with them, and she came up with these powder wafer activation plates, which basically helps to spread the heat evenly across the griddle. Now this griddle, as soon as I plug it in, it's on, so not quite ready for that, but it's gonna be nice and warm when I'm ready. So it's all plugged in, it's ready to go. The activation temperature for the powder wafers is about 160 degrees, so that's what we're aiming for. I've got my powders. I've got red powder. I've got black powder, right? And I've got some clear powder, but that's not until later. I've got a sifter. I've got a spoon. And last but not least, I've got protection. So glass powders, you don't want to breathe, so you want to have some protection. I've got my N95 mask that I can wear. That goes on just like that, right? It's going to seal around the edges and make sure that I don't breathe any powders. I also have my respirator, my NIOSH P100 respirator, right? Thing is, if I wear that, you're not going to hear me. So this is preferable to the N95s. This is definitely going to keep more of that gunk out of your lungs. Anytime that you're working with the kiln paper after it's been fired, anytime you're cleaning out your kiln wash, anything that's dust and small particles, you want to make sure that you've got a particulate mask to keep that stuff out. So I'm going to forego the P100 right now so that you can still hear me, but I do want to be safe, so I'm going to wear the N95. I'm going to get that ready because I'm not quite ready to get started. So I'm going to tell you a little bit. The powders, you can actually maybe see, especially if I go sideways, you can see there's a little bit of residue on this silicone release liner that I'm using. That's actually from the red powder and when I did this before. So if you're using multiple colors of powder, you might want to take a wet, damp, like a damp paper cloth and wipe those off in between, of course, wearing your mask because you don't want that to get airborne or anything. And then you can safely throw that away in the garbage. So the red is what I'm going to use first. I'm going to use the red first and try and find a spot where you guys can see what's going on. So the reds first. The reds are the hearts. So in order to do this, I'm going to take a little bit of red. I'm going to sift a thin layer down onto the release liner, maybe like a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch. And I want it to be an even layer because if it's an uneven layer, when I lay the powder wafers down, as the heat hits it, it'll end up kind of doing a sideways type of thing, you know, like from the side, it'll fall funny and it could distort it. So you might just want a nice dusting on the bottom layer. And the reason for that is because you want the powder wafer to soak up powder on both sides, right? Because you really want more, you want it to carry as much powder as possible, and that's going to give you a much better opacity or color, I guess, when you're using it, all right? So I'm going to sift a thin layer of that. I'm going to put my 2 hearts down, and then I'm going to go ahead and sift layers over top of it until I can't see the edges of the hearts anymore. Once I've got to that point, I'm going to take the spoon and I'm going to press down into it so I can kind of hopefully guarantee that there is a nice even layer and everything is pressed together so that the powder or the wafer material can really soak up the powders. And then I'm going to put it on the griddle, and then I'll do the black material as well. Okay, so mask on. I told you what I was going to do. Let's do it. All right, way more space than I need there because I only have 2 small hearts, right? 2 small hearts. There we go. All right, so I can't see the edges anymore, and I put a little bit more powder on even, and then I'm gonna press down like that. Okay, kind of see the edges over here. I'm gonna give it just a little bit more, just to make sure, because I really want it to soak up as much as possible. Now I'm gonna go ahead and take my spatula, and maybe I'll just do this all at once. All right, so here's the red, right? I'm put the red over here. I'm gonna do the black now. And then I'll just put them both on the plate at the same time. Here's my black material. Now this piece you can probably see a little bit better where the black powder was previously. This time I've got quite a few more little pieces to put in there. All right, now I can go ahead and lay these down. I'm going to keep these guys all next to each other so that when I'm digging them out, I know exactly which one is which, right? These guys go with the eyebrows, so I'm going to keep these over by the eyebrows. And this is the big eyes, so I'm going to keep the 2 big eyes. I'm going to just put the 2 big eyes above the lips. Oops, space those out a little bit more. I don't want them touching each other. Okay, and then the 2 little eyebrows, I'm going to put those up at the top. There we go. All right, now I can go ahead and cover these again. In the past, I haven't used a sifter with this. I've just scooped glass on there and just made sure that there was plenty on top of it. The problem with that is sometimes the glass is an insulator even in powder form, so it takes a little bit longer for the top to get heated, but I mean really you're only concerned about the powder that's next to the wafer, right? All right, so go ahead and take this, put it on the griddle here. All right, so the nice thing about the powder wafer activation plate is it goes down and creates a nice even thickness of material. It's a big steel, it's like a steel plate, right? So it's going to even out the pressure or the temperature on the griddle. The griddle has elements that go around, and sometimes there are areas that get hotter than the others, and that can kind of deform your powder wafers just a little bit. So you can see here's one that I did before, and the edge is a little bit deformed over here because of that heat. So while that's doing that, I've got this gun that we can, the infrared thermometer that we can kind of measure to see how the heat's going over here. It's still at about 100 here, so it's not really, the heat isn't getting to the top yet. It's definitely hot in the layer or the area where there's just a thin layer of powder. Remember, we want to get this to about 160, so it's not quite there yet. Typically about 5 minutes is going to do it for you. If you end up leaving this on the griddle for too long, the powder is actually going to deform. The edges aren't going to be as crisp. It kind of starts to just ooze out into the layers of the powder, so you get kind of not crisp edges, basically, right? So we don't want to leave that on there for too long. So it's not something that you want to do and then walk away and do another task and forget about. This is something that you want to do and then maybe tidy up a little bit while you're doing whatever you're doing, and then come back to it. These guns are actually really handy to have so you can see what's going on with the temperature. And remember, the temperature, we want it to be at the top. The temperature at the top, we want it to be about 160, maybe 170. So the temperature at the top is not quite there yet, so we're not quite ready. But once we are, we'll be able to take those off of the activation, or off of the griddle, and then fish those out after they've cooled down. We definitely need them to cool down. If the powder wafers don't cool down, then they're still liquid, and if you're scooping them out, then you're just going to kind of make a mess, really. So I've got some that I've done already, but I don't want to like go on to the next task before these are ready to come off, because like I said, I don't want us to forget about them and then end up being not cooked enough, or cooked too long. That's the other thing I was thinking about. If they're not cooked long enough, then they might grab on the powder from the bottom, but not the top. So you won't get as much saturation in your powder wafer then. So it's really important that it's on the heating plate for long enough, but not too long. How's that? Usually 5-8 minutes is going to be more than enough. Still not quite there clear at the top, but that's okay. All right, so I can tidy up here just a little bit. I'm going to tell you, while we're waiting for this, I'm going to tell you about the next step that I did that I'm not going to show you. All right, so when I'm placing these powder wafers, they are going to be random designs, right? They're going to be these little pieces, and I need to figure out where they go, right? Well, if I had this down, I could totally tell where they're going to go, but once I need to do this on my my kiln paper. Once I put my kiln paper on top of there, I can't tell exactly where they're supposed to go anymore. The other thing that I like to do is I like to flip fire these. So there are a couple different ways that you can fire these. You can fire them on their own in the kiln, and you're going to go to a much lower temperature, and it just kind of tacks them together, and you'll have powder wafers on their own. You can fire them on top of a piece of glass. They're going to shrink back a little bit then because of the way that the heat in the kiln works with the layers of the things that you're using, right? I could go into that a little bit, but just going to show you what I'm doing. So I'm going to end up turning this upside down. So this is actually the opposite of my kissy face, right? Because I'm going to put it on the clear piece of glass, but I'm going to build it upside down. Well, in order to get over here, I have my light box, and I used my light box. I just put the paper on top of that and traced out the pieces. It might be helpful, first of all, to put your glass on to the kiln paper and then trace around it first so that you have an idea of where the outside edge is. And then you can take that and put it on top and line it up with the expressions and kind of just trace them generally. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to have your designs in your powder wafer pieces, so then you're going to place those down. So if you don't have a light table, you can take this to a window on a sunny day, and that works really well too. I think some people have also taken their phone and made an impromptu light table. If you take a piece of clear glass and put it up on Dixie cups, turn it over, put your phone underneath with the flashlight on, or even just a really white, bright screen, sometimes that'll help, and you'll have an instant light table. How's that pro tip for you? All right, so let's go back and check this out. I can see a couple of outlines, especially over here on my hearts. So once the outlines start to show up a little bit, what that tells me is that the glass is starting to settle, right? So that's 160, 160, 180. So I'm going to go ahead and take those off because I know for a fact that those are ready. And you know what? I can see some outlines over here on the eye. So let's give this a look too. I bet it's ready to come off also. All right. So we're just going to go ahead and take these off. Notice I can't turn my griddle off anymore. Actually, I don't think you can notice. I can't turn my griddle off anymore because it basically is off. The only further off that happens would be to power it off. All right, so we're going to put this off to the side there. Same thing here. I'm going to put it off to the side here. And now I'm trying to keep it as flat as possible. I don't want the, put this away. I don't want the powder wafers, they're still liquid at this point, so I don't want to crinkle my pattern or anything, or my paper at this point. I want to keep it nice and flush, which is why I just used the spatula to slide it off on the table, right? And so the table's nice and flat now. Okay, next step, we're gonna get ready for firing. So I'm gonna grab, my kiln's upstairs and my studio is not, right? But what I really like to do, especially when I'm doing these little projects, is I like to build down here and then take them upstairs. And these projects in particular are a little fidgety, so I like to take Kaiser Lee board. I bought it in some 12-inch sizes and I cut it down into 6-inch sizes. So this works perfectly for classes as well. The Kaiser Lee board, it's really easy to cut. It's very light material. It's a fiber material, so it allows any extra air or anything that's burning off, it allows it to escape down through the shelf, versus ceramic shelves, which don't allow any air to escape under the shelves. You can kind of, like, if you've ever had any issues with bubbles rising up underneath your glass and you were working directly on a kiln shelf, then that was probably your issue, a ceramic kiln shelf. If you put, I mean, it was the way you designed it, and I mean, there's a lot to it, but basically, if you would have worked on a fiber shelf, you probably wouldn't have had that issue. Kiln paper helps a little bit with that. It gives you a little bit of area for any air to escape or binders to go as they're burning off. But couple that with the Kaiser Lee board, and now you've got a whole lot of extra space for anything to burn off. The Kaiser Lee board comes pre-burnt, so you don't have to stick this in your kiln and fire it up and and close everything down so that you don't stink yourself out. So that's really nice. But it is a fiber material, so you want to be careful when you're working with it that you're not like throwing it around or anything. You want to be really careful with it. You might want to wear gloves because it is a refractory material and could cause some irritation. So I've got this ready. And we're still, I don't think we're still quite ready on the pieces over here. We need them to cool down just a little bit more. I don't want to take them out while they're too hot because they will distort. One thing that you can do, let's see what the temperature is. Yeah, they're still pretty warm, right? So they might move a little bit. One thing that you can do is kind of move the edges a little bit and see how I can see the edges of the piece coming out. It means it's probably safe to take out, but I'm just gonna let it sit for a little while because I've got some that I did in advance. So I'm gonna bring these over here, the guys that I did in advance, without showing you too much of the next step. All right, so remember how I said I wanted to keep everything organized? The heart is really easy to keep organized, right? The heart is a heart, right? There we go. So that goes there, that goes there. The eye goes there, the bigger one goes there, and this looks like a bigger eyelash and a thinner eyelash. Okay, so all my pieces and parts are ready for me to go. So I'm going to take, and I'm putting my pieces down first. I've got my outline on the powder, on the thin fire. I'm going to put my powder wafer pieces down first. So here they go. And notice I'm inspecting both sides. Sometimes you can see, let's see if you can see, there's a little glare right there. That's a spot where the powder wafer didn't quite get fully saturated. I'm going to put that up against the glass. I don't know why. I just like it. If it's up against the glass, I feel like it picks up, it has less of a chance to pick up any of the fiber paper as the binders burn out of that and it disintegrates, so that you won't have as much chance of contamination. Oh wait. Wrong eyebrow. There we go. Little winky face. Winky, winky, right? Oh, and this side looks like it probably could have been better saturated. So I'm going to stick that one up against the paper too. So now I can kind of squint my eyes and look at that and see how my placement looks. My placement looks pretty good. Normally I would take this to the kiln. I think I generally take it to the kiln before I put this piece on top, just so I can make sure that nothing moves, because I have to walk up some stairs and out a door and the garage, whatever. But I'm just going to show you how I do this. The side with the texture on the glass, if there is a side with texture, I'll put that down, because one, I've got the fiber that's helping me to let any extra air escape, but now I've also got the texture. It's creating channels for me, and that's going to help any extra binders burn off as well. So if any of the binders get caught underneath the glass while they're burning off, they can end up turning to charcoal and they'll be like brown, or your powder won't quite be the nice vivid color that it's supposed to be. So this guy is ready to fire, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in the kiln. My firing schedule on this, 200 degrees an hour to 1000 degrees, and then I held that for 45 minutes. And then I went 500 degrees an hour to 1380 degrees, and then I held that for 5 minutes, and then I just turned it off. Now, that seems like a long, slow first firing, and it is. What I'm doing is I'm slowly heating the powder wafer material up until the binders in there burn off. You could probably go faster if you wanted to. I just found that this schedule works for me, and I haven't had to go any faster, so if it works, I continue to use it, right? All right, so this is going to go in the kiln, that firing schedule, and then when it comes out, it's going to look like that. Woohoo! So this guy has been in the kiln, and now he's come out. We can look at him and see there are a couple places where I might like to change my design up a little bit. The heart has a couple little crackly areas, and the eye has a little crackly area. Now, typically if I'm working with smaller pieces, I don't have to worry so much, smaller designs, that is, thinner designs, I don't have to worry so much about that becoming an issue. But once you start working with a little bit bigger designs with the fiber paper, or with the powder wafers, sometimes that does become an issue, because as the glass is melting, it's trying to get to be 1/4 of an inch thick. So it's trying to move to make that 1/4 of an inch thickness, and if it moves anywhere, that's where you might get some of those tears. Remember, I forgot I was going to flip this over and fire it again, right? So the way that I could fix this, I'm just going to do this plate as is right now. I'm going to fire it, and then I'll have a nice sample piece that I can remind myself of and look back on to see the first piece and what was wrong with it, right? There's you could continue to try and keep working on this piece to get it right, or use the time to reflect on it, make sure that you, when you put it together on the base piece of glass and fire that it's going to fire like you actually want it to, and then figure out exactly what you need to change in the next piece that you do. Now remember, we're doing a small sample piece because we want to make sure that everything turns out like we want to before we end up doing a larger piece or do a whole production run of these all at once, right? So here's what I'm saying that I think I would do the next time around. I think I would take 2 layers of probably every component, and I'm gonna fire those next and see how that turns out. See if my eyebrows grow, or my eyes grow at all, or my wink grows at all, or my heart grows. It might just be that piece wasn't saturated fully enough. It might be that the hearts are the only pieces that need 2 layers, but I'm gonna give it a go with 2 layers of the fiber, of the powder wafer. So basically what that means is all of the pieces that I just prepped here, those will go underneath that clear piece of glass for the first firing. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I'm going to see how it turns out. So the next step now is I need to put this in the kiln, right? I've scrubbed off any of this. This was down against the powder wafers, or the thin fire. So when the thin fire, the binder burns off, it turns to powder. So when I took this off of the shelf, I needed to run it under water, and I scrubbed any of the extra thin fire off of it. And now I need to put it on my base piece of glass. But I know from experience in previous times when I've done this, sometimes as the glass edges seal, right? We were just talking about this with the ceramic kiln shelf before. The glass doesn't give you anywhere for any of that air to go as the glass, basically as the glass settles. So what's going to happen as the glass is getting hit in the kiln, here's our glass piece in the kiln. We've got our elements are above, right? As the glass is getting warmed up, the heat is coming down across the glass. All of the glass is getting heated from above, but the sides are also getting heated. The sides are getting hotter because they're getting heated from above and also from the sides. So the edges of this are going to heat up, and they have a chance of sealing shut before the middle of the glass has relaxed and fallen. So there's a greater chance that we're going to catch little bubbles in between our designs. So we're gonna anticipate that, and we're gonna put some powder down first. So I'm gonna take my piece of glass. A piece of glass goes down on my board. Now this I could do directly on my ceramic shelf as well, but if I'm having volume control issues, there is a chance that I'll get a big bubble that raises up. Chances are smaller since it's a small piece, but if this were a big piece, there's a greater chance for the edges to seal against the kiln shelf, and then the air gets trapped and goes where it can, which is up and out, right, at higher temperatures. Before I put this guy down, I'm gonna go ahead and dust a thin layer of powder across the surface, and that's gonna help create channels from the middle all the way to the edges so that any of the air that needs to escape can escape. So it's gonna cut back on my chances of bubbles in between my facial elements when I go ahead and fire this. I don't know if it makes sense yet, but that's what I'm doing. All right, back on with mask. This time I'm gonna use clear powder. Still gonna sift it. I just need a very thin layer, and I just need it to go all the way across. So here's my layer of clear, and need it to be on the edges as well as across the middle. And I kind of like to not really see the base color underneath this. That's when I feel I have enough. It seems like maybe that's a lot of powder, but it's really not. It's just a very thin layer of powder. So now I can take that and put my other piece of glass on top of it, and then when this fires in the kiln, chances are very good that I'm not going to have any bubbles in between any of my facial elements, right? So there we go. Now let's double check my inspiration piece. They're both winking in the same direction, right? I think we're good to go. Okay, so now this is going to go in the kiln too. The firing schedule for this one, it's a full fuse. I don't have any binders that I'm burning off now at this point, so I don't have to worry about going super slow. But I've got a bigger kiln, and I'll probably be firing a bunch of this in my bigger kiln. Whenever I'm firing on a ceramic shelf, which I have in my bigger kiln, these are going to go all across the ceramic shelf. I'm going to space them out as evenly as possible so that the heat hits the ceramic shelf. It doesn't have areas that get a lot of heat and areas that don't get a lot of heat. That can be an issue for your ceramic shelf. It can shock. It can actually break. I've had a shelf break, and it's unfortunate, but I did learn my lesson, and thankfully I had a backup shelf, so hurrah. I can still use the cracked shelf, and if I want to fire bigger pieces on it, I just put 1/8 of an inch fiber paper all the way across the top. Anyway, this is a full fuse. I'll probably go 300 degrees an hour up to 1,000 and hold it for 45 minutes, and then I typically do a bubble squeeze even though I'm working with, well, I've got all the powders and everything, right? So I've got this bubble squeeze segment, which is 50 degrees an hour up to 1250. And I hold that for about 20 minutes. So the idea behind the bubble squeeze is that it's getting very slowly getting everything at the same temperature so that the edges of the glass don't get uber hot and seal off before the middle of the glass has had a chance to get hot and settle in. So the idea is the middle of the glass is going to get nice and warm and express the air out to the edges before the edges seal, right? So nothing's going to melt together at 1250 yet. And then I'll probably go either 250 or 500. Once we get past that temperature, you can go a little bit faster. So it just depends on the other pieces that are in the kiln with me. But I could probably go 500 degrees up to like 1425 and hold for 20 minutes. That would be a full fuse. You can either, at your full fuse, you could either go to a higher temperature and hold it for less time, or you can fire at a lower temperature and hold it for a longer time. A lot of times when you're doing a full fuse, if you stick to that lower temperature, you can tend to reuse your kiln paper a little bit more. So that's kind of a nice trick, is try and fire a little bit lower. You're going to have more success if you've got transparent or especially clear against the base. Some of the opaque colors really hold on to the kiln paper, so even at the lower temperatures. You won't be able to reuse it unless you're really careful at pulling that off. But I think that's basically it. So that's going to go in the kiln. Once that comes out, and then I'll be able to stick it into the mold that I've got prepared, and then I'll do a slump firing on that, and then that will come out, and then I'll have my emoji dish. So the next thing I'm going to do, oh yeah, I need to show you these powder wafer guys over here. So they're definitely cool now. So let's move this guy ahead over, because he's going to go in the kiln. And let's bring these guys over so I can dig those out and show you what those look like. So remember, and I think I'm going to do that with this piece that I was doing earlier, because this piece, I'm going to put that back in the kiln. But I want 2 layers of everything. So again, thought I was done with this. Let's put our mask back on. All right. Has anybody been wearing their P95s out and getting people looking at you and coveting your mask? Okay. All right, so you can see, I can just scoop that right out. There's my heart. I knock off any of the extra powder, and there's that guy. There's a little bit of distortion over there. Like I said, I need to find my powder wafer activation plates. That extra thick steel really helps balance everything out. So that's actually not too bad. That second heart looks a little bit less distorted than the other one. Usually when I'm doing this, I'm not really persnickety on most things. I am not much of a perfectionist, so if it's just close-ish, I'm more than happy with that. And I think that'll be totally fine. All right, there's one. Oh, there's the other one. So see how I kind of just come in here, and they're not super fragile, so long as I'm not trying to break them. Oh, there's the other one. Just knocking the extra powder off. So there's my 2 eyes that are open. Here's my 2 lips. Oh, I can see one of them is a little bit shiny. It must, I think there could have been a little bit more powder on the bottom layer. Would have been all right. Okay, there's another, I think that's the winky eye. Knock that off, and I think I have 2 more, right? 2 more skinny eyebrows. There we go. So this all can be recycled. I'm going to take this off and knock any extra powder. So this next one, when I put it together, I'm going to go ahead and take 2 layers. I'm going to put 2 hearts down, right? So they've got 1 heart there. We'll just put another heart on there. Okay, save this one for another design. I can recycle this powder back into the container. And now if I'm not going to use this piece of silicone paper with the red powder again, here's where you'd want to take, you could take a brush or even your a damp paper towel, and you could wipe it off in there or just wipe it off and get rid of it. You don't want those sitting around with any of that powder on there and then forgetting that you've got glass powder as you're shuffling things around. Right? Okay. We'll just take these guys off. There we go. Get all that extra powder off. Powder is gone. Powder is gone. And you can still see as I'm putting them down over here, even though I've knocked them off pretty good, there's still a little bit of powder that's coming off. That's okay. I mean, especially since it's black, it's really easy to see. But yeah, that is basically it. So I'm going to take, before I load that one in the kiln, I'll take 2 layers of everything and put a clear on top of that. Load that. I'll run it at the same schedule that I told you a minute ago, which was the one that I actually had. And then, yeah. Then I'll share pictures with you all when they're out of the kiln. So yeah, these No Days Studio sessions, thanks for joining me, for one. The No Days Studio sessions, I've been going live kind of just randomly as I feel like I have a project to finish, usually on the weekend. But afterwards, I record these and then lightly edit them and stick them up on YouTube. So if you missed out on the live session, don't worry, you can jump back in and watch the live session on Facebook, of course, but the quality should be a little bit better on YouTube. Look for me on YouTube. Go ahead and get over to the No Days Adhesives YouTube channel. If you hit subscribe and click notifications, you won't miss any of the studio session videos. You won't miss any of the uploads that I have. You'll get notified, so you'll always be able to tell what project is up and coming next. But thanks again for joining me, and we will see you the next time I do this. If you have any questions that I haven't answered or that are in the thread, I'll go ahead and answer those. The steel plates, Peggy, the powder wafer activation plates, I picked those up from Janine Stillman. So she is ja9designs.com. So I'll try and link to her in the comments as well. And if there are any other comments that I've missed, I'll go ahead and answer those later as well. All right. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining me. It's been a great day. Have a great one.